We are live now.
Hi, good afternoon, Cyber Future Foundation. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. Hope all are well and safe during this challenging times that we're all experiencing. My name is Dave Willox. I'm fortunate and privileged to be the host of the Innovation Hour, Innovation and Entrepreneurial Hour. And it's my pleasure to be surrounded by some of the brilliant minds in innovation and entrepreneurialism in the world. And it makes my job easy. And I'm looking forward to learning along with all of us here on the program and the community. And I'd like to just begin by saying a few words about innovation, and then I'm going to introduce our guests, and we'll kick it off into a robust discussion. And I look forward to now that we are working in speaking of innovation in this new virtual environment with new technologies and new communication tools. We have some advantages with us, and we have the chat bar. And if you have any questions in the audience that come up for our esteemed panelists, please feel free to enter them into the question bar. I'll keep my eye on that as we're chatting and try to address those. But you're going to have some great information and some excellent leadership from our panel. I'm going to just start off by saying, when many think about innovation, it brings up different things to your mind, and you may think of the new next mobile phone release, as my teenage daughters would be thinking, or robotics, a new app to solve a unique problem, or possibly creating the next cybersecurity tech startup. And many in this community have done that, and we may talk about that today. And it's all of those things. But I wanted to kick it off with a uniting message of innovation culture. We're all innovators and entrepreneurs, and it may not be the job title that you hold, but it's true. It has to be. You're all leaders in your communities of influence. And someone once said, innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. You may know that was Steve Jobs who said that, and he maybe knew a little something about innovation, but that message should resonate for all of us. Innovation is a critical leadership quality, and we're all doing it. We have to be, even if we don't realize it. We're all constantly solving for big problems, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. Cybersecurity isn't just an interconnected ecosystem represented by a variety of stakeholders at this summit. It's a living organism, and it may be one of the biggest challenges facing society today. Many of us working on it from different vantage points, and that's one of the reasons why this community is so important to the innovation culture. The different roles represented here are critical. They're critical to our national security, personal privacy, safety of our families. It impacts transportation, healthcare, our economy, the very fabric of our democracy. Literally, the future of our human experience as we know it today is impacted by the action of those in this community. I'm not trying to scare anyone, because everyone on this call and on this in this community already knows this. But what I am trying to do is emphasize the size of the problem we're all solving for, and the importance of consciously making perpetual innovation the living cord that unites us all. So that's enough for me. I'm super excited to speak with this world-class panel, all experienced and skilled innovators in their unique sectors, representing industry, policy, law enforcement, all addressing and solving for big problems. Problems that can't be solved in a silo, but together as a community with an innovative mission and creative collaboration, we have a chance to create a safe and secure digital world for our future generations. Okay, well, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I know all of them have great leadership to share with us. And I will start just going across first. And I'm not going to start asking questions yet. I'm just going to give some highlights and profiles that I've picked up through our discussions or through some of the bios we've had. So everyone on here, we haven't had a chance to speak in depth together as a group yet. So if I get anything wrong, panel, please correct me and elaborate if I missed anything. I'll start first with Kenrick, just below me. I feel a little bit like the Brady Bunch, to date myself a bit, with Kenrick. Kenrick represents our law enforcement community and industry. Kenrick spent a lot of time in his career there. Kenrick currently is a detective constable and coordinated at the Coordinated Cyber Center in Toronto, working with the Toronto Police. And he works in the emerging tech and cybercrime sector. He's currently based in Toronto, outside Toronto now, as we're all working remotely. But his work, he works around the world on a daily basis. So, Kendrick, we look forward to learning more in the discussion. To my left or right, depending on which way we're looking, is Danil. Danil Karimi. Danil is a real life champion for humanity. His impressive and vast experience spans industry, law enforcement, policy, and regulatory on a global basis. Understanding the complex international connectivity of the internet economy, he's held roles in the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, Fortune 500 companies, venture capital, and I'm just touching the surface. In his role now at Kindwell, he sits at the intersection of chemistry, technology, policy, and regulatory across international boundaries for a leading developer of environmental protection sensors that are providing critical use case solutions, ultimately impacting us all. He's like a real life Avenger. And Jeff, to my angle, this way, I guess, this way. Jeff. Jeff Davis is the Senior Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy with BlackBerry, and he oversees the smart transportation initiatives, and he's working to grow a number of active pilots currently that are in the works, and I can't wait to hear more about those. Extremely exciting innovation. When people think about innovation, that's, I think, one of the things they think about, and I get in out of my smart car on a regular basis, and I can't wait to hear what Jeff has in store for us. Jeff has also worked across the industry with some of the nation's largest organizations dedicated to advancing research, development, and deployment of intelligent transportation systems. So with that being said, I'd love to just begin the discussion, and I'll start in the same order. Well, I'll mix it up a bit and start with Jeff, since we are all excited to hear about the smart transportation system and what's next down the road in the so pardon the pun, in the technology front for moving our bodies around the world. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit more about your background, as I'm sure I did a great job at butchering and missing many of the key points, and share a bit about how innovation is used and important in your organization, and also the way that you look at innovation and how you embrace it.
Okay, I mean, honestly, I think you did a great job with the background. And once again, I feel like the dumbest person on the panel, so that's always the way to start. I actually got into working around transportation, working with transportation about it's about 6 years ago now. And prior to that, I spent a long and hefty career kind of slugging around the world with the Marine Corps. So coming off of that, and actually having the benefit of working in research and development tail end of my career in the Marine Corps really is what led me into looking towards transportation, mostly because it was innovative. Because, in my mind, there's so many things that we see in technology, so many things that software has allowed, the internet has allowed, but all these things have been built really on the back of some really, really hefty investments that were made in infrastructures long before these technologies ever came around. And what I found interesting as you started to look at autonomous and connected vehicles, and what I found amazing about them and how they fit into so many different aspects, was this was one of the first big changes, over the past, 40 years, where we actually would see a change to the physical world around us. You're not just going to see advancements as how data flies back and forth faster and faster, but how we move people and equipment more effectively from place to place. The effects on healthcare, because now you can get medicines from one hospital to another hospital across the city. If we had more autonomy in place right now, responsible autonomy in place right now, how much easier we would have been able to absorb the changes that happened in the pandemic. There's so much that this really affects in the world and really affects in innovation. That when I really wanted to get involved in something that was going to have that big of an effect. When I look at innovation, and I know you asked, how I see innovation. One of the things that I look at is what are the conditions that are required for it. What really happens there, and I believe that there's three fundamental myths that happen in education. The first myth is that if industry is left alone to just go ahead and build something, that's going to become more innovative, that governments do nothing but get in the way. I think that's myth number one. Myth number two is that we can't be innovative without government. So I think that's myth number two, to hit the other side of that same coin. And then myth number three, and really I think that one of the biggest ones, is that somehow innovation can exist without security. And I think that's one of the biggest myths that exists out there, because I think security is fundamental to how we innovate, what we do to innovate. I mean, you can start right from the basic essence of having a reliable and secure market to work within. No company could be innovative if they didn't think they could make money off of what they have, off of what they're putting their work into, what they're putting their money into. So that would stifle innovation in and of itself, the lack of stability. If you don't have that security and privacy, that ability to protect what you make afterwards, to protect yourself from corporate fraud or corporate espionage, again, you now are in a place where it's not worth it. And I'd say finally, with on that same vein, is that if you're unable to create a secure product that protects people's privacy and their very essence of security as a consumer product, I would argue that you do not have a long-standing chance for a marketable product. I would say that in the long run, you are either going to find yourself beat out by somebody who does offer that security to somebody else, or you will find consumers will just simply push away from that. And I think a lot of kudos that get missed in this, and a lot of misunderstanding that happens with that, is security, like so many things, hits the economic definition for a market failure. The overall cost for security is so much higher than what any one particular firm is going to be willing to pay for, that it requires government intervention, whether that comes in the form of regulation or policy, or simply law enforcement. As Kendrick represents in this whole thing, it's an integral part of it. and that goes right to one of the biggest challenges that we're facing now, where markets are being disrupted or can be disrupted more than they ever have before, not by information, not by innovation, but by disinformation that's happening. And I think that becomes an overarching part of where security professionals are looking and spending a great deal of their time looking. And I know we haven't talked. I mean, I could go on forever with this, but I'm afraid if I go on too long, it leaves the introduction stage and starts to become a speech. So I want to leave it there, and then and then turn it over to a couple of other people.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. And you left several areas to come back to, so that was very helpful. But really appreciate tying together the innovation in the business and the product to the value of cybersecurity. And the critical nature of cybersecurity in that process. While we were chatting, and you were introducing, we had another panelist parachute in fine fashion. David Weiner, nice to see you. And I'll make a quick introduction for David. David, we've introduced the other guests at this point, other panelists, and we just started with Jeff talking about innovation, how his organization views innovation, and how he personally sees it, and a bit more about his company at BlackBerry and what they're doing in smart transportation. But David, come back to you and to the audience. David is a true Renaissance man. He's a world recognized, and we're grateful to have him here on the panel. He's a world recognized inventor, serial entrepreneur, visionary, designer, artist, and engineer. He's been published in nearly every technology, business, and lifestyle magazine that you could name. The New York Times, Fortune, Popular Science, to name a few. His clients have included Ferrari, Nike, Ben & Jerry's, even the U.S. ski team. So today he's here to talk about 7 Tunnels, where he's the CEO of a innovative cyber technology. We'll learn more about that in the discussion. But David, thank you so much for joining us. And as you were the one who parachuted in, I think you'll get to go next.
Oh, lucky me.
And they would love to hear the important attributes that you see in innovation, why they're important to the culture of an organization, and how you utilize it. And please share more about 7 Tunnels so we can understand more about the business that you're currently leading.
Sure. Well, Dave, thanks for that very nice, over-the-top introduction. And by the way, I also want to thank Val for pulling this whole thing together. It really is pretty incredible. Excuse me. I'm going to start off, since this is a cyber-based event, I'm going to start by saying I am not a cyber expert. I'm not an encryption expert. But the last 5 years, I got pulled into I almost wouldn't call it a startup, that one person out of the bunch had a kernel of an idea for some very advanced encryption. And they initially pulled me in for some business advice and marketing ideas. And about 6 months later said, hey, would you just take over and run the company? So I've had about 5 years of education, as I like to say, just enough to be dangerous in the world of cyber. But thankfully, we have very good engineers here who can handle the tough stuff. 7 Tunnels, the company we have built, has really been all about developing quantum-proof encryption and key management technologies. And as I mentioned, we've been doing that for about 5 years. The last couple of years, we've had actual systems out in the field being used by people like DuPont and others. And we've done things, specific applications like protecting communications on aircraft for air-to-ground communications to protect executives and all the critical info that goes back and forth, whether it's email or phone or or video or whatever. But without making this a Seven Tunnels commercial, I'll just sort of end the Seven Tunnels intro with, we have patented very advanced encryption that has been proven to be quantum proof. And these are not just idle claims that, it's so easy for people to make these days. This is real technology that actually works. And now is the time. Obviously, the world is just getting more and more dangerous. But the reason I'm on this panel is really to talk about innovation, not to sell Seven Tunnels. My background is, as Dave mentioned, I started in, as a kid tinkering, and then studied mechanical engineering, went into design and designing cars and aircraft and boats and bicycles. And that led to doing all the other design that's required to ultimately put a product, technology, or system on the market. And so that's what we've done in a lot of industries. And Dave, you can stop me anytime because I can talk about this forever. But innovation is really, and I say this, because we have developed quite a marketing and branding and image side of our business beyond the design, engineering, and manufacturing side. Innovation is a marketing word in so many places. And so the real question is, what is innovation? And are people really innovating? And I used to joke that you'd go to a trade show in a given industry, and these companies would talk about their grand innovation. And it was, oh, this year we've made it in gray instead of black. And it's like, well, I don't get it. So innovation is a wonderful marketing term. It's hyperbole. And generally it's Latin for, we're trying to convince you we're doing something cool. But obviously there is a lot of very real innovation that goes on. And, there's so many questions tied to innovation. But again, I don't want to take away from the other speakers. I've got a variety of comments and questions around innovation, around cyber security and how to innovate and who does it and how and when should you and when shouldn't you. But, Dave, please give me some guidance here.
I will, David. Thank you, and thank you for the intro. And great to hear about the advancements and the forward thoughts that you're putting into Seven Tunnels and those challenges that you're tackling. They are, and I personally work in that area and have had numerous discussions on quantum encryption, the challenges that we're all going to face in regards to that, and I think I'll use that as a segue to head over to Kenrick, our law enforcement Avenger out of Toronto, and Kenrick, as we talk about quantum encryption and other emerging technologies, 5G and others that we understand will create new tools for as we're using them for good, is going to also enable the bad actors to perpetrate and to carry out their wishes, whatever that may be, and there are many. So, Kenrick, you can get to that on the second end if you wanted to introduce yourself a bit further as I gave some high level and explain a bit more about your expertise, and then please share your thoughts on innovation and how it's such a critical role in the law enforcement space, and it's not just RoboCop; it's RoboCop in digital form.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And Dave, thanks for the introduction. Your media broadcast background comes shining through when you're on the mic. So kudos to you for that. Also, a thank you to Val and Cyber Future Foundation for throwing this together. It's a mammoth task to undertake, even in the space that we're living in now, in terms of everything being virtual for conferences and seminars and things like that. I feel honored and humbled to be part of this panel. I'm big fans. I was also a co-panelist with one of Jeff's colleagues last summer at a conference. So this is the checkbox number 2 for working with a BlackBerry individual. So it's great. A bit about my background, just to, I guess, give a bit of context, because when I look at this thing called cyber and then the innovation that's around cyber, I look at it with a bit of a dual lens, not just the lens of a law enforcement officer, but also a technology lens. In that, that's what that's what I studied in school, and also worked in the industry for a couple of decades. I spent 8 years working in the Greater Toronto area, and then moved to Bermuda. I was recruited by a bank down there to work in their IT department, converting their network infrastructure from an IBM platform over to Cisco. So I'm a bit of a tech nerd at heart, with my emphasis and specialty being in network design and implementation, and of course security of that infrastructure. But I guess to paint all of that with an innovation brush, when I was trying to figure out what I was going to study, I was pretty good at architecture and what, if I should become an architect or study, computer science and look at technology. And I simply made the decision, almost an innovation based decision, because I saw that at some point innovation was just going to, and technology was just going to go take over architecture. We wouldn't be using, drafting boards and T-squares anymore. We'd be, it'd be covered by innovation and technology. So I took that route. I took the route of technology, and absolutely no regrets. After moving back to Canada, the Toronto area in about 2004, 2005, one of the things I wanted to do was look into consulting. But if you gentlemen remember, the market was a little bit soft for consulting leading up to all the events of 2008. And I had an opportunity to look into law enforcement, and it was not something that I planned on doing, but I saw that path with a view to maybe going into technological crime, more the forensic side of things. And as it turned out, it was not something I wanted to do once I found out really what was in the job. Much respect to the work that our forensic guys do, after having, been a part of Flag Telecom and built major SOCs, and that's not the work I wanted to do. So I figured, well, I'm a cop, I might as well learn to be one. So I pretty much took about every investigative course and interviewing course and search warrant writing course, every course that I could get to learn to be an investigator. And then around 2013, the agency started taking a look at what would be needed to have a centralized investigative unit for cyber. We had centralized units for homicide, sex crimes, all the major criminal offenses, but more and more technology was taking over. The threat landscape was broadening, and if the subject of the offense was not the actual technology or the data itself, the technology was somehow being used to facilitate the offense. So the agency saw quickly that there was a need to have a centralized body of expertise to investigate these offenses. And they started the unit in 2014, and I joined in 2015. And not to use a cliche and say the rest is history, but it's been a lot of fun. It's been a fun ride. There's been a lot of challenges. We started off just supporting the field in terms of the investigators and detectives around the city, keep working on cases to the point now where we're taking on our own major cases that are not just working with our domestic partners provincially and federally, but we're also working with FBI, United States Secret Service, Interpol, major agencies around the world. So when I say I work around the world, I'm physically here, but the nature of cyber is such that it does not see geographical or jurisdictional law enforcement borders. An IP address does not simply function that way. In terms of the innovation piece, it's a challenge because the adversaries that we're going against are often highly skilled, well-funded, highly motivated. And we face a lot of challenges in that, being a public funded agency, like pretty much all of law enforcement is, resources becomes a challenge. So how do we bridge that gap, and where does the innovation come from? Looking at, some of the tools and technologies that are out there, and the things that are being used by the adversary. If you take a quick snapshot look at a cybercrime risk assessment, and you look at susceptibility, accessibility, and capability, well, the capability of the adversary is almost astronomical, and it's the challenge that we face, and it's the one of the three that we have the least control over. So we need innovation. We need to to work with the entrepreneurs, the startups, to help them look at security first. And I don't know if we'll be able to eliminate it, but at least try to minimize the 0 days that are in product, especially from an IoT perspective, that get put on the market. And now, you've got an expanded landscape, and not to mention the landscape with COVID and 90% of the working force working from home now, instead of in a physical office where you had control of that accessibility portion a bit more. So a lot of challenges. I'm here to put my 2 cents worth in for what they may be worth, and contribute where I can.
Kenrick, thanks so much, and thanks for your public service. I can't tell you how much more comfortable I feel knowing that you're at the point and on the front lines. It's I've spent time riding alongside law enforcement, as well as sitting in SOCs and fusion centers with the work that you do, and you carry a lot of weight on your shoulders. And for the individual attacks that we literally hear about, I know how many exponentially that you stop. So thank you for that. And we certainly have much to come back on with you as much time as we have. That being said, Danil, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. And I gave a large global picture of what you do, and Kindwell is an extremely fascinating, innovative organization that impacts us all as it touches and focuses on the environmental factors that unite us. So, if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit more about what you do with Kindwell, and anything I may have missed on your larger experience base, and your thoughts on innovation.
Thanks very much, Dave, and thanks to CFF for bringing such a distinguished panel. I will make sure that Jeff feels much more comfortable that he's not the silliest panelist anymore. But moving forward, in all seriousness, I was out of everything that I've done, and I've zigzagged and been around all over the place in the private sector, public service, and so on and so forth. The underlying theme has always been I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. And it was actually in a retrospective probably that I felt the winds of change. I felt the winds of innovation, and I followed my heart to that. So I come from a small country that did not exist 25 years ago in the map. And when I went to university, local library would have maybe 50 books. Out of them, 49 were extremely boring. And then I discovered something as called laptop and the internet, and boom, it opened up the space completely. And I never thought that I will do so. I wanted to study medicine and then politics and law. So it's not exactly innovative topics, but what I discovered is that it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you study. The innovation is more of a function of an individual. But then to reflect what Jeff and build on what Jeff was saying is actually what became fascinating for me is the whole innovation ecosystem, because it depends as much on the government, as much on the enterprise, as much of us individually. And innovation can happen every day. Question is when it becomes too much, in which, when is innovation and when is execution. When we talk about cybersecurity, I think here is perhaps innovation entrepreneurship is as much as a bad thing as a good thing. And I know I'm being a little bit controversial, but if you think about it, cyber criminals are the most innovative and entrepreneurial guys mainly out there. They use innovation and entrepreneurship tools every day. I wish everybody would be so innovative and entrepreneurial. And very often we play catch up. When the world starts turning, I don't know how Kendrick is still smiling, because I assume he hasn't slept till March. I mean, I've been working with the law enforcement officials, the prosecutors generals, judges, and so on. And when I started 20 years ago with the UN and everything, digital evidence was just this much. Everybody kind of heard about it, but didn't really realize what it is. Now all evidence is digital, and there's not all crime is cybercrime when you're in a lockdown. So there are these fundamental events that just accelerate everything. I think Lenin used to say that there are decades that nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen, and we live through a year when decades are happening. And the only thing that sometimes it makes me stop and think about is whether this crisis is actually severe enough to bring lasting change. I know it sounds weird, but everybody's sick and tired. Everybody just wants to get back to normal. But will it last long enough for us to actually not to default on business as usual and actually try to improve? I'm positive. I think we actually are improving. If it would last, the lockdown would last it for 3-4 months, maybe not. But now that we are close to a year into it, I've seen the changes. Everybody's not much more comfortable with accepting that changes will come, and it's better to embrace it. What makes me, and I will stop here, the last point, but what makes me very excited, and what I researched with the World Economic Forum and even previously with the UN and everything, is this interconnection between the innovation ecosystems. And one thing I want to leave the panel and the audience with is that there's a great correlation between if you look at different benchmarking exercises in our world, and some of my most favorite authors are Sumitra Dutta and Bruno Lamban. They're with INSEAD and now with Cornell and IMD respectively, but they produce all this benchmarking for a new economy, and there's a great deal of correlation between the network readiness, meaning the penetration of technology in our society, between the talent readiness, meaning how talent is prepared, and between innovation ranking. No surprise. There are a few outliers that are extremely, extremely powerful in terms of cyber capabilities that may not be considered true innovation superpowers otherwise, but otherwise the correlation is extremely, extremely close. With this, I'll pause here and turn over to the panel. Jeff, I hope you feel much better now.
Thank you very much, Danil. Very interesting. I like how you threw the superpowers in there with the Avengers reference. I'll continue the conversation, Jeff, going back to transportation, something that touches us all. And you mentioned the DoD and the Department of Defense and government being critical to innovation and research, and how does your organization interface, and how do you collaborate with the government in your innovation process, and how is that important to other whether you're a startup or whether you're as you are in a large enterprise research system? Why is that so important?
So before I start on that, I want to say two things. I said I was the dumbest panelist here, not the silliest. So I still feel like the dumbest, because then I was like hoping David showed up, and then he's like, yeah, and I got my degree in mechanical engineering, and I was like, I went to the University of Florida and got a degree in history, So I always feel like the dumbest panelist that's on there, and I did not ever have the chance to work for Ferrari either. So that's another thing that I feel a little bit jealous about now too. But to kind of go back to your question, and I really feel it actually folds into something Danil said. From taking it from a macro sense and then taking it back to the company. He said, there's decades where nothing happens, and then suddenly there's innovation. It reminds me of every movie you've ever seen about Steve Jobs, or about anything you've seen about Apple. There's this, or really anything innovative in industry, right? So there's this mantra of like hard work and everybody's poor, and then suddenly everybody's rich. And the reality is it doesn't work that way, right? The reality is there's decades upon decades of research and hard work that came before you even started on the problem, that built into that and that grew into that. And then there was somebody who was smart enough and clever enough to take that, and they were in the right time and place, the right policies were in place, the right, the supporting technologies were in place for them to be able to go ahead and take that leap and jump with it. So, I think, and that goes back to David's comments. So, what's real innovation and what isn't? And real innovation is not something that happens overnight. It's something that it takes a lot of people and a lot of supporting elements working together. And that is actually something that I will say that proudly, we do well at BlackBerry as far as the collaboration. We collaborate with a lot of our partners. We treat our customers as partners. So like when you think of transportation and the auto industry, and I heard somebody describe the supplier OEM relationship as an abusive one at one point in time, because it's pretty much owned by, if you look at the five forces of the market, it's, power of the supplier is about this big and power of the buyer is about this big. So, the auto industry is, just interesting like that, but we have actually, taken them in as a partner, and we work hand in hand, and as they work through design, new designs, we work to them to build software design wins that are going to support those designs. And in turn, we work hand in hand with government. BlackBerry is a little bit less than a US $1 billion company. We don't sell phones anymore. We do mostly security software and middleware systems. And I will say that pretty proudly, we put a lot of effort into working with the government. I mean, our government affairs department, and honestly, being a guy who comes from marketing, and comes from working the strategy side of business, it's a rare place to end up in government affairs. But at BlackBerry, it's actually a pretty fun place to be, because what I'm working on is building relationships with academics. We're working with the University of Waterloo, working with groups like Berkeley Path out of UC Berkeley. Working with trying to build relationships out of those people, along with what we're doing with the governments and helping to support governments as they work towards more innovative policies. One of the things that when I really look, and it kind of goes back to the innovations that I really find impressive, and this isn't to hurt anybody's feelings, but building a new app, to go back to David's point, is not innovation in my mind. That's not innovative. It's you basically took a step based off of a lot of hard work that people put in. You could take that all the way back to the people who built the electricity grid from the get-go. But when you think of big innovations, I think of something that changed the world. The diesel engine is a perfect idea, but diesel's concept of what the diesel engine was going to do for the world and what it inevitably did for the world were two different things. And the function of that, the function of that innovation, what happened because of the forces that were happening around the world. So when I look at innovation, at least when I see innovation and what turns into real innovation, it's actually that thing that's fixing the problem, that's coming at the right time, at the right place, and is paying the proper respect to all the work that's been done that got it to that point. It's the hard work of actually understanding all the steps, the history, the engineering, the infrastructure that's required, the policies that are happening, the market forces that are changing, that lead into saying, okay, now is the time to try to make this step, and then seeing that and moving on with it. And so, I mean, that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but that's how we see innovation. That's really how I see it playing in.
Well, thank you. That's great, and that's a great way to think about it, as well as to share with our audience and how they could be thinking a bit more out of the box, rather than trying to recreate the existing, but be a bit more forward thinking and go beyond the traditional convention that we're having. And BlackBerry's always done that. And I think there was a story where after Sony was hacked by North Korea and their film, that their servers shut down. They couldn't get their mail. They couldn't communicate. But someone remembered that they had BlackBerries stored in storage that they could pull out and were able to light up and communicate again, if I'm remembering correctly. But so taking that down into the and trying to share a message with our audience around R&D and how they can be more innovative. Kenrick, I wanted to talk about your front lines. You're seeing the problem first, also often, or first to be alerted to it after an event of an attack of some kind, and start the process of peeling back the onion. If you're on the front lines and doing that, how do you get ahead of the bad actors and try to innovate to create them? That seems to be a challenge for law enforcement. But for our audience, if you're on the front lines doing that, and then they're in the back end, and the startups and the enterprise organizations are trying to support you with technology or create technology themselves, how do they stay engaged with what's happening in the community? It's called research and development for a reason. There's a research part. How do they connect and work with you to help better their development path?
That's a great question. I think we can approach that from two perspectives. I think the first thing is, there's a colloquialism that says "no victim, no crime," and so the first step really in all of this is the reporting. So there's aspects of law enforcement, whether it's street crime or cybercrime, that can be proactive, but still today in 2020, quite a bit of it is still very reactive in terms of an offense taking place, a data breach taking place, and then an organization making a decision. Well, should we report? Or are there regulatory compliance issues forcing us to report? What are the decisions that have to be made? And generally speaking, those decisions are better made if there's an incident response plan in place, right? So let's start with, we have to start with that. So then, the data breach takes place. There's a playbook to go to. There's a breach coach that can quarterback the organization through all of this. And then Danelle made the comment earlier about all evidence nowadays is digital. And I think it was a great comment and a great observation in terms of saying all crime is cybercrime. Because it wasn't too long ago we had the conversation as to whether or not, the criminal offenses, if are there street crime or is there cybercrime, or is all crime cybercrime, or does all criminality have some sort of cyber component? And I think that's the reality, because even if it's a simple theft under from the local, convenience store, there's still an element of cyber in that the perpetrator likely had a mobile device pinging off a cell tower somewhere, maybe connected to a Wi-Fi hotspot. The video surveillance is probably digital. So even on its face, where it doesn't look like it's a cyber crime, it's definitely, there's some cyber components to it. So we're faced with that regardless of what the offense is, no matter how small, all the way up to a major sort of nation state, high level, high threshold offense. So early reporting is key. If you look at now the evidence being digital, and you look at the volatility of digital evidence, in the real world, you're looking at things like fiber, DNA, fingerprints. They have a shelf life, and that level of volatility is even more so when it comes to digital evidence and the digital artifacts that we are looking at. So the people working in the back end in terms of internal cybersecurity or internal information security, or an external cybersecurity company that's brought in, they are looking at the same. I mean, they're looking at mediation, because they're looking at, okay, where's the hole? How did they get in? Are they still in? And how do we keep them from getting back in? So they're going through all of these artifacts. But the interesting thing is that those artifacts we call evidence. So in the perfect world where there's an incident response plan and law enforcement engaged, we're now walking through the process from both a remediation perspective and an attribution perspective, because our goal is different. We are looking to look at those same pieces of evidence, but put somebody behind the keyboard and put a credible case before the courts, right? At the end of the day, law enforcement is really the only punitive measure that we have to try and slow the tide of cyber. But if you want to look now at the innovation side of it, and what are the technologies? I think first we have to look at the offenses. What are we seeing? And we're seeing a tremendous uptick in ransomware. We're seeing a tremendous uptick in business email compromise and cryptocurrency related offenses. So if we look at those things, then we really need to look at, from a technology and innovation perspective for ransomware, what is the next big advancement in advanced cryptography, and being able to deal with that from an investigative standpoint. When it comes to business email compromise, we have to look at, from an innovation perspective, what are the next big steps or the next pieces of innovation in intrusion detection systems and intrusion protection systems. At the end of the day, the whole problem or issue, if I can call it that, of cybersecurity and the resultant cyber crime, it's not a technology issue. It's a people issue from front to back, because you have, threat capability, you have cyber adversaries who are people, you have, people who are just an end user who are somehow, whether it's through social engineering or some other form of vulnerability, they're compromised and they're clicking on the wrong thing. This issue starts and ends with people, which is to say, well, that's not a technology or potentially innovation issue, but it is actually, because now you're looking at the opportunity for innovation around things like penetration testing. So don't just test your systems, test your firewalls, test your intrusion detection and your access control, test your people. So what are the thought processes that have to go behind that, and how do you do that effectively, and how do you train people in those things? When we look at things like cryptocurrency innovation, it's all about blockchain. It's all about blockchain and the ability to have tools and techniques and processes to be able to do blockchain analytics to, quote unquote, follow the money. So, in terms of the audience and who may be listening, I mean, these are some areas that where we desperately need innovation, so we can keep pace. It would be nice to get ahead of things, but we're looking to at least keep pace. And in the absence of innovation in those areas, based on what we're seeing in terms of ransomware and business email compromise and crypto related offenses, I mean, it is the currency of cybercrime. We're going to fall way behind the curve.
Yeah. Thanks, Kenrick. That's super helpful, and I know the audience is going to benefit from that, and the points on where to focus, as well as how to build that process into their organizational DNA. And I really feel for the challenges on the adversary front, on the funding and the wherewithal that they receive and have, as opposed to our ability to counter that. And we really have to invest more in those defense mechanisms and be proactive in preventing. So thank you for those points. We are going to be running up on on the time here, but I did want to get back to David with an audience question. And David, if we have maybe a couple of minutes, then I'd like to go back to Danil for some final thoughts from Danil, and then I'll sum it up with a couple of points that came in the questions at the end. So David, one of the audience questions was, what was the attractive elements that drew you to invest within the encryption security? And with all of the things that you've done and all of the areas that you've worked on, you've invested in encryption security and countering the risk of quantum in particular.
Well, a lot of what drives me in general with everything we do, we talk here because we're an innovation lab in essence, in doing things in different industries. It's always about performance and style. And one of the things that's driven me crazy in the last 10 years has been this, what we call the good enough mentality. And whether we were dealing at the time with music and audio processing technology, and it sounds good enough, or you're talking about cyber encryption or security, oh, what we have is good enough. And that attitude just is like, fingernails on the chalkboard for me, because, everything we do is sort of driven off of Formula One auto racing mentality. And we use that as a theme and a culture to drive us to innovate, to drive us to do the best thing possible. And so encryption, while it wasn't my area of expertise, from a business standpoint and from a human standpoint, it was so obvious that this was a global issue and something that people were not addressing. And, like with so many other things we've done, where the big guys and the big companies and the big engineering firms, in essence, I'm sorry to say this, sort of had their head in the sand. Oh, what we have is good enough. Oh, we know what we're doing. We don't need help. We don't need any more. And that's really what drives me every day, every night, is, here's something we can attack and just do it better. And maybe we can't. And that leads to, and I know we don't have a lot of time, there's so much that needs to be said to this audience about innovation, not about specifically what areas to innovate in, but what's your attitude about innovation? What's your attitude about your engineering team? Giving people freedom to brainstorm. How often do you brainstorm? Do you just give them assignments and say, go do it, and I need it by Friday? Or do you get people together and truly brainstorm, which was always the most exciting thing that happens in our walls?
Yeah.
Always the most exciting.
Yeah, that's a great point, David, and thank you so much. And you do look forward at the unmet challenges that are out there, and quantum encryption and the challenges facing some of the repercussions of that on the good guy side are extremely important and needed. So thank you for leading in that. And one of the areas that I wanted to lead into, and Danil, you can kind of build on this final thought, is one of the things I do is I work with startups and I mentor them through a innovation ecosystem. The one that I'm connected with is called Capital Factory. They're based out of Austin. They're national and have global presence, and extremely well managed and sustainable and run. And we invest in the fund, and I mentor the startups there, and they are also partner with the DoD, and the DoD works with them on rapid innovation programs for the startups, which has become a very, very important role, because the DoD has found that they are falling behind on their ability to adopt rapid innovation quickly because of the stalling of the and the cost and time for a startup. How important is the community, Danil, in building your innovation mindset, and in your opinion, and how do you use that?
So I think the answer is depends. What I mean by that, it depends on your personality. I'm the person who learns by talking to people and brainstorming, and so community for me particularly, but I know that for millions others, that's the source of innovation. That's where the inspiration comes from. I also have seen innovation happening. A lot of people just close the door and just they like to think. They're thinkers, and there the community perhaps would have to come in at a later stage, because come too early, it would be disruption. But yeah, in majority, I would suspect the community is extremely important. And even from the sense that it would allow those people that don't necessarily function well, they innovate better on individually, to actually give them that space and understand how important that is. But allow me to actually go back to a little bit to what Kenrick has been saying. One thing that I want to stress, he picked up on the cybercrime versus street crime. As we move into smart city environment, as we move, there will be no such thing as street crime. Again, this is all combined, and innovation, again, it happens. It's a function. We always, as human beings, we always underestimate the impact of technology short term, but we completely underestimate it long term. So innovation is happening not only in the tech side, which is extremely important. It also happens on the business model side. It also happens on the policy side. And it's only when all the three things go hand in hand, that's where you get really healthy innovation ecosystem, which I suspect is happening in Austin in the Capital Factory that you mentioned. And perhaps given that we're running out of time, I just wanted to make sure that I get a chance to say it. David, it's very impressive that you managed to combine all. If you pick three words that excite me the most, you managed to combine them all: encryption, quantum, and Formula One.
Well, I wish I could say I planned it, but I owe that all to you. Thank you. This is a phenomenal panel. We've been branded the Cyber Avenger panel. I've taken a screenshot. T-shirts will be in the mail. And thank you all. Please stay safe and stay well. And I look forward to the rest of the event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.